The morning sun cast a golden glow over Buckingham Palace as excitement filled the air. Today was meant to be one of the most joyous occasions in recent royal history. Prince William and Catherine, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, were preparing for what should have been a celebration that would capture hearts around the world. The palace staff moved with practiced precision, ensuring every detail was perfect for the grand arrival that had been months in the planning. Catherine stood before her bedroom mirror, her reflection showing a woman who had grown into her role as a future queen with grace and dignity. Her auburn hair was styled in soft waves, and she wore a stunning blue dress that complemented her eyes perfectly. Yet there was something different about her today, a mixture of anticipation and an inexplicable heaviness that she couldn't quite shake. She had felt it for weeks now, this strange combination of joy and unease that seemed to follow her everywhere. William entered the room, adjusting his military uniform with the same careful attention he always gave to public appearances. He paused when he saw his wife, struck as always by her beauty, but also noticing the subtle tension in her shoulders. They had been married for over a decade now, and he could read her moods like a favorite book. Something was troubling her, though she hadn't spoken of it directly. "You look beautiful," he said softly, crossing the room to stand behind her. His hands found her shoulders, and he could feel the slight tremor that ran through her at his touch. "Are you ready for today?" Catherine met his eyes in the mirror, managing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "As ready as one can be," she replied, her voice carrying that musical quality that had charmed the nation from the moment she first appeared at William's side. "The children are excited. Charlotte has been asking about the ceremony all week." Indeed, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis had been buzzing with anticipation. They understood that today was special, though perhaps not fully grasping the significance of what was about to unfold. George, now old enough to understand his place in the line of succession, carried himself with a dignity that reminded everyone of his father at that age. Charlotte, spirited and confident, had insisted on helping choose her dress for the occasion. Little Louis, still young enough to find wonder in the pageantry, had spent days practicing his best behavior. The preparation for this day had begun months earlier. Palace staff had worked tirelessly to coordinate what was being called one of the most significant royal events in decades. Media from around the world had descended upon London, their cameras and reporters positioned at every possible vantage point. The British public had shown overwhelming support and enthusiasm, with crowds already gathering along the processional route despite the early hour. King Charles III had been involved in every aspect of the planning. This was, after all, a moment that would define his reign and set the tone for the future of the monarchy. He had worked closely with William and Catherine, ensuring that their wishes were respected while maintaining the traditions and protocols that gave such occasions their gravitas and meaning. The palace corridors buzzed with activity as final preparations were made. Flowers had been arranged with military precision, each bouquet and arrangement carefully chosen to reflect the significance of the day. Security personnel conducted their final sweeps, ensuring that every possible precaution had been taken. The household staff, many of whom had served the royal family for decades, moved with the quiet efficiency that marked all great royal occasions. In the nursery, the royal children were being prepared by their nanny and a small army of helpers. George stood patiently as his ceremonial outfit was adjusted, his young face serious as he contemplated his role in the day's events. He had been briefed on the importance of the occasion and understood that the eyes of the world would be upon him and his siblings. Charlotte, ever the performer, was delighted with her outfit and had already charmed everyone with her confident proclamations about how beautiful she looked. Her personality, a delightful blend of her mother's grace and her father's determination, shone through every interaction. She had asked countless questions about what would happen, showing the curiosity that marked her as a true Windsor. Louis, still small enough to be swept up in the excitement without fully understanding its source, was simply happy to be included in what he could sense was something very special. His innocent joy and enthusiasm had been a source of light for his parents during the intense weeks of preparation. The media attention had been unprecedented. Royal correspondents had analyzed every detail that had been released, speculating on significance and meaning. Fashion experts had weighed in on Catherine's expected choices, while constitutional scholars debated the historical importance of the day. Social media buzzed with excitement and anticipation from royal watchers around the globe. But beneath all the pomp and preparation, there were undercurrents that only those closest to the family could sense. Catherine had been unusually quiet in recent weeks, often lost in thought in a way that was uncharacteristic for someone usually so present and engaged. William had noticed these changes but had attributed them to the natural stress of preparing for such a significant public moment. The morning routine proceeded with clockwork precision. Breakfast was served in the private dining room, though neither William nor Catherine ate much. Their children, however, were animated and hungry, chattering about the day ahead with the unconscious ease of those born to such moments. Their excitement was infectious, and for brief moments, it seemed to lift the mysterious cloud that had been hovering over their mother. As the time for departure approached, final touches were applied. Catherine's jewelry was carefully selected, pieces that honor tradition while reflecting her personal style. Her makeup was subtle, but perfect for the cameras that would capture every moment. William made final adjustments to his uniform, each detail checked and rechecked by the staff whose job it was to ensure perfection. The palace communications team had prepared for every eventuality. Press releases were ready, social media posts were scheduled, and contingency plans were in place for any unexpected developments. This was, they all understood, a moment that would be remembered and analyzed for decades to come. Outside, the crowds continued to grow. Royal enthusiasts had claimed their positions hours earlier, some camping overnight to ensure the best views. The atmosphere was festive, with Union Jack flags waving and impromptu sing-alongs breaking out among the gathered well-wishers. Street vendors sold commemorative items, and the general mood was one of celebration and anticipation. The weather had cooperated beautifully. The sun shone brightly in a clear blue sky, with just enough breeze to ensure flags would flutter properly for the cameras. It seemed as though even nature itself was conspiring to make this day perfect for the royal family and their subjects. As the final minutes ticked away, William and Catherine shared a private moment in their sitting room. The sounds of preparation echoed from elsewhere in the palace, but for just a few minutes, they were alone with their thoughts and each other. William reached for his wife's hand, noting how cold her fingers felt despite the warm morning. "Whatever happens today," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years of shared experiences, "we face it together. We always have, and we always will." Catherine squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. She had always marveled at his ability to remain calm under pressure, a trait that had served them well throughout their years in the public eye. Today, she would need that strength more than ever, though she still couldn't articulate exactly why. The call came that it was time to leave. The children were assembled, looking picture-perfect and appropriately solemn for their roles in the day's events. The household staff lined up to see them off, a tradition that marked the most important royal occasions. Even in these final moments, everything proceeded with the precision and grace that characterized the best of royal protocol. As they prepared to step into the public eye, none of them could have imagined that this day, planned as a celebration, would become one of the most emotionally charged moments in modern royal history. The grand arrival that awaited them would indeed end in tears, though not for any of the reasons anyone could have anticipated. The words that William and Catherine would speak before the day was over would echo far beyond the palace walls, touching hearts and changing perceptions in ways that would resonate for years to come. The stage was set, the players were ready, and history was about to unfold in ways that no amount of careful planning could have predicted or prevented. The royal motorcade moved through London streets with ceremonial grandeur. But inside the lead vehicle, Catherine felt her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with the excitement of the occasion. She sat beside William, their children arranged properly in the seats behind them, all of them waving dutifully at the crowds that lined the route. The cheers were deafening, a wall of sound that seemed to press against the bulletproof windows of their car. George pressed his nose to the window, marveling at the sea of people who had come to witness their journey. "Mama, there's so many people," he whispered, his young voice filled with wonder. Charlotte bounced slightly in her seat, clearly delighted by the attention, while Louis clapped his hands at the colorful flags and banners that decorated every lamppost and building along their route. William maintained his practiced public demeanor, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally different about today. Catherine's hand in his felt fragile, almost bird-like, and he noticed how she kept taking deeper breaths as though she couldn't quite get enough air. When he caught her eye, she smiled, but it was the smile she wore for difficult public engagements, beautiful but somehow distant. The destination that awaited them was the newly constructed Royal Children's Hospital, a state-of-the-art facility that represented years of planning and fundraising. Today's ceremony would officially open the hospital's doors, with William and Catherine cutting the ribbon before touring the facilities and meeting with patients, families, and medical staff. It was exactly the kind of engagement that both of them usually loved: meaningful, impactful, and directly connected to causes they championed. Catherine had been particularly involved in the hospital project from its earliest stages. Her work with early childhood development and mental health had naturally led her to support this facility, which would serve some of the most vulnerable children in the country. She had attended countless planning meetings, reviewed architectural drawings, and worked closely with medical professionals to ensure the hospital would be everything it needed to be. As they approached the hospital, the crowds grew even larger. Parents held their own children on their shoulders, hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family. Many held signs thanking Catherine for her advocacy work, expressing gratitude for her efforts to improve children's health care and mental health services. The overwhelming display of public support should have filled her with pride and joy, but instead, Catherine felt a growing sense of disconnection from the scene unfolding around her. The motorcade pulled through the hospital gates, where they were greeted by a reception committee that included the hospital's chief administrators, lead physicians, and representatives from the various charities that had supported the project. Camera crews positioned themselves strategically, ready to capture every moment of the historic opening ceremony. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the hospital's chief pediatrician, stepped forward as the royal family emerged from their vehicles. She had worked closely with Catherine during the planning stages and had developed tremendous respect for the Duchess's genuine commitment to children's welfare. Today, she was particularly excited to show Catherine the mental health wing, which had been designed with input from Catherine's own research and advocacy work. "Your Royal Highnesses," Dr. Mitchell said, offering a warm smile as she curtsied, "welcome to what I believe will become one of the world's finest pediatric facilities. We're honored to have you here for this momentous occasion." William stepped forward with his characteristic warmth, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with the welcoming committee. His natural ease in such situations had always been one of his greatest strengths, and today was no exception. He listened intently as Dr. Mitchell outlined the schedule for their visit, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated his genuine interest in the hospital's mission. Catherine stood beside him, participating in the conversations, but seeming somehow removed from them. Those who knew her well might have noticed that her usual animated engagement was replaced by a more subdued presence. Her responses were appropriate and gracious, but they lacked the spark of curiosity and enthusiasm that typically characterize her interactions with healthcare professionals. The children, meanwhile, were adjusting to the change from the car journey to this new environment. George assumed his most formal posture, clearly understanding the importance of the occasion. Charlotte looked around with bright eyes, taking in every detail of the hospital's cheerful exterior decorations. Lewis held tightly to his father's hand, slightly overwhelmed by the number of new faces surrounding them. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was scheduled to take place at the hospital's main entrance, where a stage had been erected for the occasion. Members of the media had been given designated positions, while local dignitaries and hospital supporters filled the surrounding area. The atmosphere was festive, with a brass band providing musical accompaniment and children from local schools serving as an honorary chorus. As they moved toward the ceremony area, Catherine was approached by several families whose children would be among the hospital's first patients. These meetings had been carefully arranged, providing opportunities for personal connections that would highlight the hospital's impact on real lives. Usually, these interactions energized Catherine and reminded her why her advocacy work mattered so deeply. The first family consisted of parents with their 7-year-old daughter Emma, who had been born with a rare heart condition. Emma's parents, Mark and Lisa Thompson, had been advocating for better pediatric cardiac services for years. Their daughter's multiple surgeries and treatments had required travel to facilities hours away from their home, creating enormous stress and financial hardship for the family. "Your Royal Highness," Lisa said, her voice trembling with emotion as she guided Emma forward, "we can't thank you enough for everything you've done to make this hospital possible. Emma will be able to receive her care so much closer to home now." Emma, despite her small stature and the visible scar from her most recent surgery, stepped forward with remarkable confidence. She had prepared a small bouquet of flowers to present to Catherine, practicing her curtsy for weeks in anticipation of this moment. Her courage and determination were immediately apparent to everyone present. Catherine knelt down to Emma's level, accepting the flowers with genuine warmth. For a moment, the distant quality that had marked her interactions earlier seemed to fade as she focused entirely on this brave young girl. "These are beautiful, Emma. Thank you so much for thinking of me. I hear you're going to be one of our first patients here." Emma nodded enthusiastically, her shy smile transforming her entire face. "The doctors say I might need another operation, but now I won't have to go so far away from Mummy and Daddy." The simple honesty of the child's words seemed to pierce through whatever fog had been surrounding Catherine's thoughts. She spent several more minutes talking with Emma and her parents, asking about the girl's interests and hobbies, learning about her love of art, and her dream of becoming a doctor herself someday. William watched this interaction with a mixture of pride and love that always filled him when he saw his wife connecting with the people their work was meant to serve. This was Catherine at her best, genuine, caring, and completely present in the moment. Yet he also noticed how she seemed to be fighting back tears, an emotional response that seemed disproportionate even to the touching nature of the encounter. Similar meetings followed with other families, each story highlighting different aspects of the hospital's mission. There was Michael, a 12-year-old boy whose severe anxiety and depression had led to multiple hospitalizations, and his parents who had struggled to find appropriate mental health services for children. There was baby Grace, born prematurely and requiring specialized neonatal care, whose parents had spent weeks sleeping in hospital waiting rooms before she was stable enough to come home. Each encounter seemed to affect Catherine more deeply than usual. Her responses remained appropriate and caring, but those closest to her could see that something profound was happening beneath the surface. William began to watch her more carefully, ready to step in if she needed support, though he couldn't identify exactly what was causing his growing concern. The ribbon-cutting ceremony itself proceeded flawlessly. Catherine and William stood together before the wide red ribbon that stretched across the hospital's main entrance, while photographers captured every angle of the historic moment. The hospital's board chairman offered brief remarks about the facility's mission and the impact it would have on children's healthcare in the region. When it came time for William to speak, he delivered remarks that had been carefully prepared by the Palace communications team, but enhanced with his own personal touches. He spoke eloquently about the importance of ensuring that all children have access to the highest quality health care, regardless of their circumstances or location. His words were heartfelt and appropriate, striking the right balance between formal ceremony and personal conviction. "This hospital represents more than medical excellence," Williams said, his voice carrying clearly over the assembled crowd. "It represents our commitment as a society to protecting and nurturing our most precious resource, our children. Every child who enters these doors will receive not just outstanding medical care, but the compassion and support that every young person deserves." The crowd applauded warmly, and Catherine stepped forward for her own remarks. This was typically a moment she embraced, an opportunity to speak from the heart about causes that mattered deeply to her. The mental health wing of the hospital had been designed with significant input from her own research and advocacy work, making this opening particularly meaningful to her personally and professionally. But as Catherine approached the microphone, those watching closely could see that something was different. Her usual composure seemed more fragile than usual, and her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. William moved closer, offering his silent support while maintaining the dignity appropriate to the formal occasion. What Catherine said next would be remembered long after the ribbon had been cut and the ceremony concluded. Her words would reveal the depth of emotion and personal struggle that had been building beneath the surface of this carefully orchestrated public appearance, transforming what should have been a celebration into something far more profound and heartbreaking. Catherine stepped up to the microphone, her hands visibly trembling as she gripped the podium for support. The hundreds of faces looking up at her expectantly seemed to blur together, and for a moment she felt completely disconnected from the scene unfolding around her. The prepared speech in her hands, carefully crafted by Palace Communications staff and reviewed multiple times, suddenly felt meaningless against the weight of what she was truly feeling. She began with the expected formalities, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside. "Thank you all for being here today to witness the opening of this remarkable facility. This hospital represents years of dedication from countless individuals who share a common goal, ensuring that every child receives the care and support they need to thrive." The crowd listened attentively, expecting the usual gracious remarks that characterized royal speeches. Media representatives adjusted their recording equipment, anticipating sound bites that would be replayed throughout the day's news coverage. But those who knew Catherine best began to notice subtle signs that this speech would be different from anything they had heard her deliver before. William stood slightly behind, and to her left, close enough to offer support if needed, but positioned appropriately for the formal nature of the occasion. He watched his wife's profile, noting the tension in her jaw and the way her breathing seemed more controlled than natural. Something was building inside her, something that their years together told him was significant, though he couldn't predict what form it might take. "As many of you know," Catherine continued, her voice beginning to carry a different quality, more personal and less rehearsed, "I have spent years working on issues related to children's mental health and early development. I have visited countless facilities, met with thousands of families, and listened to stories that have both inspired and broken my heart." She paused, looking out over the crowd, her eyes finding Emma Thompson and her parents among the assembled guests. The little girl smiled and waved, her innocent joy a stark contrast to the complex emotions that Catherine was struggling to contain. "But today, standing here before you, I need to share something that goes beyond prepared remarks and official statements. Today, I need to speak not just as the Duchess of Cambridge, but as a mother, a woman, and a human being who has been profoundly affected by the stories I've heard and the families I've met." A hush fell over the crowd as people sensed that something unexpected was happening. The media representatives looked up from their notes, recognizing that this was departing from typical royal protocol. William felt his protective instincts sharpen, ready to step forward if Catherine needed him, while also trusting her judgment about what needed to be said. Catherine's voice grew stronger, though it carried an emotional weight that made everyone listening lean in more closely. 3 months ago, I met a mother whose 12-year-old son had taken his own life after struggling with depression and anxiety that went unrecognized and untreated. She told me that if there had been a facility like this hospital available to them, if there had been specialized pediatric mental health services in their community, her son might still be alive today. The impact of her words rippled through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water. Several people in the audience gasped audibly, while others felt tears spring to their eyes at the raw honesty of her revelation. This was not the polished, carefully diplomatic language typically associated with royal speeches. This was something far more personal and devastating. That mother's pain became my pain, Catherine continued, her voice now carrying a tremor that she wasn't trying to hide. Her loss became a weight that I have carried with me every single day since that conversation. And she is not alone. There are countless parents who have lost children to mental health crises that could have been prevented with better resources, earlier intervention, and the kind of specialized care that this hospital will now provide. William moved slightly closer, his presence a silent offer of support. He could see that his wife was fighting back tears, but he also recognized the importance of what she was sharing. This level of personal disclosure was unprecedented for a royal family member, but it was also authentically Catherine, a woman whose compassion had always run deeper than protocol typically allowed her to express. I have tried to maintain the composure expected of someone in my position, Catherine said, her voice breaking slightly on the word composure. I have smiled at events, delivered prepared remarks, and represented the crown with the dignity that is required. But today, in this place that represents hope for so many families, I cannot pretend that the work we do is merely ceremonial or symbolic. The children, sensing that something profound was happening, remained unusually still. George watched his mother with wide eyes, understanding that this was different from her usual public appearances. Charlotte moved closer to William, instinctively seeking the comfort of his presence. Louis, though too young to understand the words, seemed to sense the emotional weight of the moment. The mental health wing of this hospital, Catherine continued, gesturing toward the building behind her, was designed with input from families who have lost children, from survivors of childhood mental health crises, and from healthcare providers who have been fighting on the front lines of this epidemic with inadequate resources. Every room, every program, every service represents a child who might be saved, a family who might be spared the devastating loss that too many have already endured. Dr. Mitchell, watching from the side of the stage, felt her own eyes filling with tears as she recognized the depth of Catherine's commitment to their shared cause. This was far beyond the typical celebrity endorsement or royal patronage. This was a woman who had been fundamentally changed by the work she had undertaken and the story she had been entrusted to hear. I want you all to know, Catherine said, her voice growing stronger despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her, that every family I have met, every story I have heard, every child who has struggled with mental health challenges has left an indelible mark on my heart. Their courage has inspired me, their pain has motivated me, and their losses have driven me to push for the kind of comprehensive, accessible care that should be available to every child who needs it. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Even the media representatives had stopped taking notes, caught up in the unprecedented emotional honesty of what they were witnessing. This was a side of the royal family that the public rarely saw, vulnerable, deeply affected by their work, and willing to share their personal struggles in service of a greater cause. There have been nights when I have lain awake, thinking about the children we couldn't save, the families we couldn't reach in time, the systems that failed those who needed them most. There have been days when the weight of these stories has felt almost unbearable, when I have questioned whether anything we do is enough to address the scale of this crisis. William's heart ached as he listened to his wife reveal the emotional toll that her advocacy work had taken on her. He had seen her struggle with these feelings, had held her during the sleepless nights she mentioned, but he had never heard her articulate the depth of her pain so clearly. His admiration for her courage in sharing this publicly was matched only by his concern for the emotional cost of such disclosure. But then I think about Emma Thompson, Catherine said, turning to find the little girl in the crowd, and Michael Harrison and baby Grace, and all the children who will benefit from this facility. I think about the mothers and fathers who won't have to drive hours for specialized care, who won't have to sleep in hospital waiting rooms, who won't have to navigate complex systems alone during their most frightening moments. Emma Thompson's mother was crying openly now, moved by the fact that the Duchess had remembered her daughter's name and included her in such a personal and important moment. Other parents in the crowd were equally emotional, recognizing their own experiences in Catherine's words and feeling deeply honored to be acknowledged in this way. This hospital is not just a building, Catherine continued, her voice rising with renewed strength and conviction. It is a promise that no child's mental health crisis will go unnoticed, a promise that no family will face these challenges alone, a promise that we will do everything in our power to ensure that every child has the opportunity to heal, to grow, and to thrive. The emotional impact of her words was palpable throughout the gathered crowd. Healthcare workers wiped away tears as they recognized their own dedication reflected in Catherine's commitment. Parents held their children a little tighter, grateful for the advocacy that had made this facility possible. Even seasoned journalists found themselves moved by the raw honesty and genuine passion in her voice. As Catherine's speech built toward its conclusion, no one in attendance could have predicted that what came next would be even more emotionally devastating than what they had already heard. The prepared conclusion to her remarks lay forgotten in her hands, replaced by words that came directly from her heart and would reveal the full extent of the personal journey that had brought her to this moment. Catherine paused, looking down at her prepared notes one final time before setting them aside completely. When she looked up again, her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice carried a clarity and strength that surprised even those who knew her best. What she said next would forever change how the public understood both her personal journey and the depth of the royal family's humanity. "There is something else I need to share with you today," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying clearly to every person in the crowd. "Something that makes this hospital opening even more meaningful to me personally than you might imagine." William stepped closer, sensing that his wife was about to reveal something profoundly personal. His own heart began to race as he realized that she was departing not just from her prepared remarks, but from years of carefully maintained privacy about their family's most intimate experiences. 5 years ago, Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, our family faced our own mental health crisis. Charlotte, who was only 3 at the time, began experiencing severe anxiety and panic attacks that left us feeling helpless and desperate for answers. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. This level of personal disclosure was unprecedented for the royal family, and everyone present understood they were witnessing a moment of extraordinary trust and vulnerability. For months, we watched our bright, spirited daughter retreat into herself, Catherine said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks though her voice remained steady. She stopped sleeping through the night. She became afraid to leave the house. She would have panic attacks that left her gasping for breath and trembling with fear. As parents, we felt like we were failing her every single day. William's own eyes filled with tears as he listened to his wife share what had been the most difficult period of their marriage and parenthood. He remembered those dark months when they had felt completely lost, trying every resource available to them while watching their daughter suffer in ways they couldn't understand or fix. "We had access to the best resources available," Catherine continued. "We could call specialists, arrange private consultations, and access services that most families can only dream of. But even with all of our advantages, even with all of our connections and resources, we struggled to find the right kind of help for our child." Charlotte, now understanding that her mother was talking about her, moved to stand closer to William. At 8 years old, she had only vague memories of those difficult early years, but she could sense the emotion in her mother's voice and the weight of what was being shared. If we, with all of our privileges and resources, found it so difficult to navigate the mental health system for our child, how much harder must it be for families who don't have those advantages? Catherine asked, her question hanging in the air like a challenge to everyone present. How many children are suffering right now because their families don't know where to turn or can't access the care their children need? Dr. Mitchell watched from the side of the stage, tears streaming down her own face as she understood the deeply personal motivation behind Catherine's years of advocacy work. The Duchess had never shared these details during their planning meetings, but suddenly her passionate involvement in every aspect of the hospital's mental health wing made complete sense. Charlotte is here with us today, Catherine said, turning to smile at her daughter, healthy and happy and thriving, because we eventually found the right combination of therapy, support, and love that helped her overcome her anxiety. But her recovery took nearly 2 years, during which our entire family learned about the reality of childhood mental health in ways we never expected. The little girl who had been bouncing with excitement earlier in the day now stood solemnly beside her father, beginning to understand the significance of her mother's words. Her own journey through anxiety and recovery had shaped not just her childhood, but her entire family's understanding of mental health advocacy. I want every parent who is struggling with a child's mental health crisis to know that you are not alone, Catherine said, addressing the crowd, but speaking directly to the parents she knew were listening. I want you to know that seeking help is not a sign of weakness or failure. I want you to know that recovery is possible and that your love and support can make all the difference in your child's healing journey. William could no longer remain silent. He stepped forward to the microphone, his own voice thick with emotion as he spoke. "What Catherine hasn't told you," he said, his arm moving protectively around his wife's shoulders, is that she blamed herself for Charlotte's struggles. She spent countless nights wondering if she had somehow failed as a mother, if there was something she should have seen or done differently. Catherine leaned into her husband's support, drawing strength from his presence as she had done countless times over the years. Their public display of mutual support and shared vulnerability was unlike anything the royal family had ever shown before. "I did blame myself," Catherine admitted. "I thought that if I was a good enough mother, if I loved her enough, if I tried hard enough, I could somehow will my daughter to be well." It took therapy for our entire family to understand that mental health challenges are medical conditions, not parental failures. The crowd was completely silent, many people crying openly as they recognized their own struggles and guilt in Catherine's words. Parents in the audience nodded in recognition, remembering their own dark moments of self-doubt and desperation when their children were suffering. "This hospital," William said, his voice carrying the same emotional weight as his wife's, "represents everything we wish had been available to us during Charlotte's crisis. It represents the future we want to create for every family facing similar challenges. But more than that," Catherine added, "it represents hope. Hope that no parent will have to feel as lost and helpless as we did. Hope that no child will have to wait months for appropriate care. Hope that mental health will be treated with the same urgency and compassion as any other medical condition." Emma Thompson, standing with her parents in the crowd, raised her small hand. Without being called upon, she spoke up in her clear, brave voice. "Princess Charlotte, I have anxiety too, but I'm getting better just like you did." The simple, honest words from the 7-year-old created a moment of connection that transcended all protocol and formality. Catherine knelt down and beckoned Emma forward, embracing the little girl as Charlotte stepped forward to join them. The image of the two children who had both faced mental health challenges, comforting each other in front of hundreds of witnesses, became an instant symbol of hope and healing. "This is why we're here today," Catherine said, her voice breaking completely as she held both girls. "For Emma, for Charlotte, for every child who deserves the chance to heal and grow and live without fear. William wiped his own tears, no longer caring about maintaining royal composure. We decided to share Charlotte's story today because we want you to understand that mental health affects every family, including ours. There is no shame in seeking help, no shame in struggling, and no shame in needing support. We also want you to know, Catherine added, standing again, but keeping her hands on both girls' shoulders, that if you're facing similar challenges, you are not alone. Help is available, recovery is possible, and there is always hope. The emotional climax of the moment was overwhelming. Healthcare workers, parents, children, media representatives, and royal staff were all crying together, united in their recognition of the profound truth that had been shared. The ribbon-cutting ceremony that was supposed to be the highlight of the day seemed almost secondary to the emotional breakthrough they had all witnessed. Dr. Mitchell stepped forward with the ceremonial scissors, but Catherine shook her head. "I think Charlotte and Emma should cut the ribbon together," she said. "This hospital is for them and children like them. They should be the ones to officially open its doors." The two little girls, one a princess and one an ordinary child from a working-class family, stood together at the ribbon. Emma looked up at Charlotte, who smiled and nodded encouragingly. Together, they cut the ribbon that would officially open the Royal Children's Hospital, their joint action symbolizing the shared hope and healing that the facility represented. As the crowd erupted in applause, William and Catherine stood together, their arms around each other, and their remaining children, tears streaming down their faces, but their expressions filled with hope and determination. They had transformed what was meant to be a ceremonial ribbon cutting into something far more powerful. A moment of genuine human connection that would be remembered long after the hospital doors had opened and the first patients had been treated. The grand royal arrival had indeed ended in tears, but they were tears of hope, healing, and shared humanity that touched every heart present and would continue to resonate far beyond that extraordinary day.